So I'm just going to diverge one more time because there's something else I wanted to talk about. You see conversations on this, but not very many people seem to understand it. Although we've had some good rants recently on student loans. So I'm just going to talk about this because obviously I've spent a lot of my time in the educational world, either as a student or a director or a professor. So how does education work? And again, I'm looking at this from my American perspective. Most people can't afford to go to school full time without having to work, and they don't want to work and distract themselves, so they get a government loan. Most students, by definition, are young and therefore naive and therefore vulnerable. So when the school offers them a government loan, they assume the school is good-hearted and the government wouldn't overcharge me. So of course I'll take the government loan. The government, after that, has become about $100,000 or $80,000. So now you're at 80 to 100K minimum, up to 200, could be 200K depending on the school. The government then sells that to a private bank, which in my experience charged $20,000 for a service fee, which was nothing. They didn't do anything. And I'm talking about Navient. I think the name of the company was Navient or something. They called me one day, or they sent me an email saying, you're behind on your loans. If you don't pay within 1 month, we're going to put a $20,000 service fee. And I had actually just sold a house at that time. So I was lucky I had the money and I paid it off. But that was the advantage of living in Europe for 9 years, where cost of living was lower, and I happened to have sold our place in Barcelona at that time, and I happened to have had the money, and that's how I escaped student loans. But if I hadn't lived in Europe for 9 years, and if I hadn't fortunately sold that house exactly at that time, I wouldn't have had the money to get out of my student loans, maybe later. So the way student loans work in the United States is you get a government loan, you assume they're going to take care of you because they use that language. This is your opportunity, this is how you better yourself, this is how you contribute to society, is through education and then getting a good job and advancing you and your family and everything else. These people are young, naive, vulnerable, and they're not being appropriately mentored, so their government loan gets sold to a private bank, which becomes a shark fest, a feeding frenzy. So you now turned your youth into shark meat for these private banks. And the result of that is called debt slavery. And this is why kids, even with degrees, because the typical salary in the United States hasn't increased in proportion to the inflation, those kids can never get out. Those kids can virtually never get out of that debt, especially now. Even before the pandemic and even before the current level of inflation that we see internationally, but especially in the United States, I knew people smart, good-hearted, hardworking, uniquely intelligent, not just good at their job, but uniquely talented, multi-language, speaking 3 languages or 2 languages, with doctorate degrees, who said to me, I will never be able to pay off these loans. So if hardworking, intelligent, multi-language, international level, doctorate people have a hard time paying off their student loans, imagine what it is, for a lot of people who get degrees and they don't have that level of opportunity. They don't have international mobility. They don't speak multiple languages. They got their job. They're going to sit in a cubicle at a desk somewhere, and they're going to do that job. But it sure as hell isn't going to pay, $100,000 or $200,000. One of my friends from medical school emailed me recently, as he does about once every 2 years, and he says, I'm basically in crisis. He says, maybe he's making $200,000 a year, $250,000, but he says, I'm working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I think he said that it was soul crushing, but he didn't know how to get out of it, otherwise known as the golden handcuffs. So I'll include a quick clip that recently went viral on this topic of government loans. But, in a society that doesn't provide individual mentoring, If this doesn't exist, then the only way for people to become prepared for an advanced, complex society is through education. But look at where that education gets them. It gets them trapped into debt slavery because the government, working with private industry, leverages their youth and inexperience and naivete into shark meat.
I just checked my student loans because I needed to get the information to someone, and what the fuck? I started with $80,000. I have been paying for 10 years. Last year, I paid $6,000 lump sum because that's really the only way to get it low. That took it down to $76,000 after I'd been paying for 9 years. The grand total is I have paid $120,000 and I still owe $76,000. How the fuck is this possible? What? I think I might be late to the game learning about this. Student loans are really messed up. $120,000. What are you supposed to do with it?
So, again, I'm working on two different diagrams. One is kind of a Venn style diagram with overlapping humanity, government, institutions, and the absence of any ethical guiding light or orientation. But the pillars, the four pillars of society, I think also makes for a reasonable diagram. So, an ideal diagram would simply be one diagram, but in this case, it really does need two different diagrams. So those are a few things I've been thinking about, even though I've also been looking a lot at neuroinflammation and cytokines and all this kind of stuff. I'm not really seeing anything very meaty there in terms of things I can read, digest, appreciate, and respect as being of value. I'm looking at a lot of molecules and genetic traits or block-out mice or block-in mice or whatever, but I'm just not seeing anything that's particularly meaty there. So I'm going to end this on a positive note. At least it's positive for me. One of the things I enjoy, now that I'm actually getting into a morning routine again, a new morning routine. My new morning routine is coffee. Maybe while I'm seated having coffee, I might look at a few messages or catch up on emails or look at a video or something like that. But my new morning routine is coffee, followed by archery, followed by exercise, and then kind of getting the day started. So I've got a few new bows I'll talk about maybe another time. I realize maybe nobody cares about that. I'm aware of that. But for me, it's been kind of fun. And I think it has value. So at some point, I'll talk about it. Because again, I approach archery, I can get out there and have fun, but I also approach it from a structured learning perspective. And I'll talk about that some other time. But anyway, what I've done recently, I had to buy a new bow because my other bow is in storage. My favorite bow is in storage right now. So I bought a new bow that I like a lot, but I also bought a left-handed bow for a young man who I'm mentoring. But one day I had the idea of using that left-handed bow, even though I'm a right-handed shooter. I started using a left-handed bow, and I really enjoyed it. So then I bought another bow. I've got another one that's ambidextrous. It's actually behind me on the wall. So anyway, I've had a really good time with archery lately, using it kind of as my morning wake-up routine, but also using both hands, which I've never done. I started to learn archery when I was probably 6 years old. And of course, I always shot with a right-handed posture, being right-eye dominant. But now I'm teaching myself to shoot with my left hand. And I've enjoyed that quite a bit. In fact, I'll show you my bows. These are the bows that I'm enjoying right now. I realize this is totally the dessert on this conversation, but you can either eat dessert or not. This is the bigger of the two bows, which I love this bow. It's got a totally different feel to it. But like I said, it's a right-handed bow, but I started to shoot it with my left hand, and I've enjoyed that a hell of a lot more than shooting it with my right hand. And let's see, that one was a little bit more expensive. This one was cheaper, but this one's like butter. It's so easy to use. But again, like it's supposed to be shot from this hand, but I'm shooting it with this hand, and little did I know that was a lot more fun. So I'll talk about archery some other day. But anyway, that's the conversation for today. I wanted to talk about how structured thinking can apply across the board to personal topics, manual tasks, science and medicine, but also business. Two examples of that are employees, selecting them, training them, motivating them. You could look at that from a capitalist perspective or a humanitarian perspective. Contracts they need to have four components. What is the job? What's the price? What's the timeline? What's the quality standard that we're aiming for here? And then if none of those work, or if we have a problem up there, then what's the resolution? Those are some things you should think about using a structured approach to looking at contracts. I mean, I certainly never did that. I mean, I've signed hundreds of contracts in my life, and I never had any structure to it. And I usually got screwed out of something somewhere along the way. Not always, but commonly. Four main pillars that hold up society are humanity itself, government, institutions, and religious, moral, ethical, or philosophical, structure and support and direction. Right now, when I look at those things, I think humanity is in big trouble. Governments aren't working very well, especially, look at the collapse of the entire European Union is happening right now. And that, I'm not even talking about Canada, the rest of the UK, the United States. Governments worldwide are collapsing or on the verge of collapse. Institutions are in big trouble. If your private banks get into enough trouble, that's going to affect everything that happens on individual human levels, but also on a government level. Just like we have no mentoring on an individual level, we also have no religious, moral, ethical, or philosophical guiding light that's guiding philosophy, or guiding society, I should say. And you see that. You see the impact of that absence on humanity, families, groups, governments, and institutions. So that's my quick overview. While I'm still recovering from this probably adenovirus that I had over the weekend, I think my mitochondria are performing at about 80% right now. But I'm glad at least I have 80%. I can walk around, but man, I get out of breath pretty quickly. So hopefully by the time I do my next video, I'll be back to my usual, 90 or 100%. But thanks for your attention, and I'll get this video edited and online as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Again, just for reference, we're at 1:13 p.m., middle of the day on Wednesday, November 15th. And hope you're all doing well, and hope you're all at least as optimistic as I am, even though sometimes things aren't looking very good. And I can't make them look good. I can't go back and look at this diagram with, I'll use a green pen this time. I can't go back and look at this and say, man, individual health is just amazing internationally. Families are doing great. We're getting mentoring for our young kids so that the older generation also feels like they have a place in the world. We all have time for purposeful groups based on either, recreation or mission or location. So, man, society's doing great. Our governments internationally are performing at a high level, implementing, good quality standards and good ethics on an international level. Our institutions are doing great. Education's awesome. Medicine's great. It's run by ethical principles, and doctors are committed to those principles, even at the sacrifice of their own profit. And all of that is working so well because we have a great moral, ethical, and philosophical compass. I can't say that any of that is true. Even though probably on some level I would like to. Even being a realist, I would still like to be a positivist, even though my commitment to being a realist is stronger than my commitment to being a positivist. So that's the way I see it today, November 15th, 2023. Thank you very much, and I'll get this online as soon as I can.